Hey, it's Jack, and this video is called Why Does He Act Interested and Then Suddenly Disappear? 5 reasons I'm going to give you in this video. Hey, if you are new to the channel or you haven't yet subscribed, come on, let's do this. Click this button here and then tap the bell notification so that you hear of new videos when they come out. My name is Jack Butler. I'm a relationship coach, and I release more than one video every week on personal growth and relationships. And listen, hey, if you haven't done my free webinar, I'd love to make an invitation to you personally. You can just click the link below this video. You can find a time that works for you in your time zone. It's called the 3 Keys to Being Relationship Ready. It's been getting awesome feedback. It'll be some of the best investment of time you make this year. We've got some really profound teaching. It's with my teaching partner, Clayton Olson, who you may also know from YouTube, and we would love to have you with us. So just click that link and find a time that works for you. All right, so we're going to get into this. I've got some 5 reasons here for you today. And the first thing, before I even get into a reason, I just want to say this to you. If you've had the experience that you were having a connection with a guy and it was going great and then he suddenly disappeared and you don't really know why, I just say my heart goes out to you. I know that that can be a really difficult thing. I know that it can be a very confusing and kind of arresting thing, that it's really hard to let go, and you might be being down on yourself or hard on yourself. And I'm here to say, I don't want you to be hard on yourself in any way, and I actually don't even want you to be down on a guy if at all possible. There are connections that work out and there are connections that don't. And really, if we just simplify everything, we want you to find the connection that's going to work out. So if a guy disappears on you after a couple of months, as difficult as that may be, and it might be excruciatingly difficult, I don't want to underplay that, but it's a good thing that he disappears, because if he wasn't going to be in that slot for the long term, you want to know. Much better that he does it after 2 months than he does it after 2 years and you've wasted a lot of investment. So here are 5 things that could be going on. The first thing is that the connection that you have is largely a physical or sexual connection. Sometimes this is the actual truth of what's going on, is that there isn't a particularly strong intellectual connection. There's maybe not a particularly strong heart or soul connection, but there's a lot of physical connection. And whether you're actually sexual with someone or not, that is really the main way that we're connected. If you think of the kind of like the chakra system, it's kind of like that is the place down there in the sexual center. That's where we're connected. And it's not really that we're so connected in other places. And for most of us, to make a relationship compatible over the longer term, there's kind of a minimum amount of connection we need to have across our centers. It's not like we can just leave the emotional center out, or we can leave our intellectual center out. Most of us need some kind of mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical connection in order to want to be in relationship longer term. Now, here's what's difficult about this, is that it can then just seem that, oh, this guy is only interested in sex. And that could be true, right? There are plenty of guys that are kind of playing around and that is really what they're orienting to. It could be that that's also just kind of true of this particular connection, that is really what's there, whether you explore it or not. And so that can just be difficult. It can be disappointing. And sometimes it's almost like that needs to run its own cycle a little bit for then it to clarify, oh, that is what the connection is really about. And for whatever energy or buildup there's been in that realm to kind of be relaxed, and then we can look beyond it. So I know that can be disappointing where you're like, wow, maybe I was kind of romantic or sexual or intimate with this guy earlier than I was going to be, and maybe he kind of wanted it and maybe I didn't, and now I'm kind of like left like, wow, I feel kind of cheapened. And so this is just an invitation for you to name and know your own sexual boundaries. You don't have to be intimate with anyone that you don't want to be. And also to realize that sometimes it doesn't have to be cheap. It just might be what is kind of there. Like, you can put any kind of value judgment on that you want. But if it's true that you don't really have or never would have a deep heart connection with this guy, it's better that he disappears in some ways, right? It's better that you guys don't try and continue that connection. So I want to invite you to think about all the different levels of connection that you can have with a guy, and notice as you're dating, notice which of these are actually online. The second thing that could be happening is that he has actually met someone else, right? Now, this is difficult again, but it's not uncommon that when you have, a sort of kind of connection with a guy, but maybe it's not like he's really Mr. Right for you, that at a certain point, one of you, and maybe it's him in this instance, he goes and meets someone that he actually feels much more serious about. And again, as difficult as it can be, because that can feel personal, that can feel rejection, that can feel like all sorts of things, in the long scheme of things, it's better that that happens because he wasn't your guy. And you want to minimize the amount of time that you invest in guys that are what? Not your guy, right? Kind of simple, but kind of profound when you really start to put that into action. And I wouldn't be too afraid if you can ask it from a place of non-judgment, and if you can ask it from a place where you're willing to hear the answer. If you've been connecting with a certain guy and then it's kind of dropped off and you're struggling to let it go, you could always ask, like, hey, I'm just curious, did you meet someone else? and he may or may not be truthful with you about that, but it can be one way of actually getting closure. But that is a real possibility, that sometimes guys are kind of casual. Yeah, I'm not, nothing too serious. And then they meet someone, and that connection is actually what elicits from them, oh, I want to be a bit more serious about relationship. And that doesn't guarantee that connection is going to go anywhere or work out, but it kind of brings something online that maybe wasn't online in the connection between you two. And I want you to take a stand for having that thing online with a connection with a Mr. Right or a potential Mr. Right. So this, again, it actually kind of works in your favor. Rather than it just being like, guys are douchebags and they ghost, that's one narrative that you can have on this. I don't know how it really helps you necessarily. It might be better to have a narrative that everything that isn't the right guy for me to invest in is noise, is distraction, and as hurtful as it was and as rejected as I felt, I'm glad it went by the wayside because I am ready and primed for the right connection that I'm going to pursue more meaningfully. Okay, the third thing that could have happened is that you could have been in some kind of unconscious attraction. If you've watched my videos in the past, you'll know that I use this phrase. And what it really means is a kind of arresting, often physical or sexual chemistry that is based upon largely an unconscious archetype from one of your backgrounds, which could be an early caregiver like mom or dad. Said differently, you're in the bar, you get the ping, you notice the guy, there's a quick attraction. That kind of quick attraction, it's rare that is actually what constellates as long-term compatibility. If it's at that level where it's like, wow, it's just so intense that it could be based upon, wow, I'm just attracted to this person and there's excitement that I experience with them, but it doesn't necessarily tend to mean that we actually have compatibility. So sometimes you get really attracted to someone and it kind of burns quickly and then there's actually not something that's really there. That brings us on to the fourth point, which is learning how to distinguish what is really alive in a connection versus ideas and projections. So we could call this aliveness versus ideas and projections. Aliveness means that when you spend time with someone, you actually come alive. Not always, but as a general trend, there's a sense that, wow, there's an energy that we have. I feel more myself when we're with you. We actually can be good and relaxed in our connection with each other. Rather than what often happens, and Guy, I know this from personal experience in the past, that you get into a connection and there's suddenly this real just like, wow, we could be this, we could be that. There's all these ideas that are pouring forth about, where this could go or who we could be together or what thing we could do in the world or what mission we could create or what business we could build or what we could be in our community or whatever the narrative is, that it's actually based upon mentalization. It's based upon ideas, projections that may or may not have any basis in the actual reality of what is between you. So if you find yourself fantasizing a lot about the future, you may want to slow it down, disengage that, and just notice, what is it actually like when we spend time together? And sometimes what happens when a guy disappears, and this could be true in the other direction as well, but he disappears because he notices, you know what, actually, when I drop those ideas and those projections, we don't have as much here as I thought we had. That we don't actually easily just make for each other's authenticity, that we don't necessarily kind of complement each other in that way and bring each other alive in this sort of gentle, ongoing flame that could be tended for a long time. It's actually that a lot of our connection was based upon the excitement of having found each other and who we could be rather than the reality. You've heard it before, right? Date the present, not the past or the future. A lot of times it's hard to do that because we get ahead of ourselves in the connection. We notice the things that could be coming down the pipe. And we're actually not that contactful with the present and what's actually going on. So if you notice that in a connection, you spend an hour together and actually you're kind of exhausted and you just need a ton of space, maybe that won't be the connection that's really going to be right for you. And sometimes it takes the sexual chemistry or the kind of romantic chemistry to kind of quieten enough for a guy to actually realize that. And again, this can go both ways. But if a guy's disappeared on you, it could be because that's what's actually true, that the connection isn't going to be a life-sustaining connection for him or for both of you, and that he's actually tuned into that. Now, in an ideal world, could he communicate that with you? Absolutely. Is it likely that he's going to communicate that with you? Possibly not. He may not even know how to articulate that. He may just have a hunch or an intuition. He may be feeling ashamed, right? That, we were so excited about each other. We were going to be this thing. And now, whoa, it's just all melted away like a castle in the sky. He probably doesn't feel good about that. He probably doesn't feel like he's in integrity with that. And, a lot of guys, and it can even sometimes be part of our defense, we just don't want to hurt you consciously. We can hurt you in all sorts of unconscious ways or because we don't really tell the truth, but we don't want to hurt you in the like, you know what? I actually don't want to pursue this connection with you anymore. And we can give it a reason, and often you want a reason, but the reason may not be the actual thing, right? It may be a pretty limited view of what's going on. How many guys can really have thought about or developed enough to be able to articulate, that I was a projection that this thing was based upon, and as I dropped the fantasy, I noticed that our presence wasn't particularly alive or contactful for me. Maybe that's not going to happen. So sometimes you have to cope with the fact that you might not really get the full story, either because he won't communicate it or he actually doesn't even know what the full story is to communicate with you. Now, the fifth thing that can be going on, and you may have heard me allude to this in other videos, is that his investment strategy and your investment strategy are different, right? Your investment strategy might be something like, I want to go on a few dates to work out if this is a guy I want to invest in. And then once I've worked that out, I'm going to single-mindedly pursue investing in this relationship. And I want to close down all other possibilities, and I really want to mobilize behind this. And maybe, by the way, that's a strategy that you use in your own life, right? You kind of caught a particular opportunity, but when you decide, boom, you mobilize behind it, you kind of go all in. And not everyone has that investment strategy, and certainly a lot of men don't have that investment strategy when it comes to relationship. Some men have what I call the due diligence investment strategy, and I use the the analogy of starting a business. So when you're starting a business, you might do a whole bunch of due diligence, which doesn't mean that you're going to invest in the business. It's that you're doing due diligence on the business. You're trying to see, is this a good investment proposition? And so there's a lot of guys that might run that phase for weeks or months to know, is this something I actually want to invest in? And by the way, when they're in that phase, they're going to talk and act and walk as if they are investing in it. And that's why it's confusing to you. Because they're happy to make plans. They're basically in until they're not in. Whereas a lot of people have the reverse, right? You're not in until at some time you are in, and then you're in, right? Whereas this guy is like, I'm in until actually 3 months I'm not in. And I get why that would be really confusing to you. I've been that guy in the past, so I kind of get it from the inside out. But if that's not you, you're going to be like, that's a stupid strategy. That's crazy. Why would you do that? It's a thing. I'm not even going to try and explain it. I just think it's more powerful for you to get on board with the fact that that is a possibility of how some guys invest in relationship. And so until you get through some minimum threshold, which for most of us is probably 3 or even 6 months, you may not fully know what this guy is available to invest in. Right? Sometimes he may really know. He may know really quickly, an actual knowing, not just a mind-led fantasy projection expectation. You remind me of my mom unconsciously. None of that. He might actually know. But that is not super common. And so for most of the time, you might have to get that he doesn't really know until at some point he actually just gets a no. And then at that point, he might downshift the relationship kind of rapidly, and he might even switch his attention into another connection. And you might say, well, this guy is a douchebag. And maybe he is. But maybe he just had a very different investment strategy, and maybe you guys never got really clear about where he actually was. He had a lot of excitement, he had a lot of enthusiasm, just like you might. But like, wow, I'm really excited. We might invest in this business. I'm looking at the financials. It's really exciting. I'm looking at the development of this business. It's really exciting. And that doesn't mean that I've signed on the dotted line and I'm actually going to make an investment. And you may have even been hurt in the past for a guy that you kind of felt proverbially, maybe didn't marry you, but he did kind of sign on the dotted line. Right? He did kind of say, yeah, I really, I'm starting to make plans a year out. And you were like, wow, this guy is really into me. But until a guy says, you know what, you are my person, you are my one, you are my beloved, you are in my heart, I want you and I see no other. Until he says something like that, I would make no assumption that that is actually what's going on. So you can see why I'm a fan in these situations of a more authentic and revealed style of conversation, because you want to make zero assumptions about his world and zero assumptions about what things mean to him, other than what he's communicating to you and other than what he communicates to you on an ongoing and consistent basis. That is where the power is. And he may even surprise himself that his due diligence ends up with a different conclusion, because until the unconscious attraction, until the romantic infatuation, until the arresting sexual chemistry, until a lot of these things, the falling in love, until a lot of that has kind of run its course and subsided a little, you don't really tend to see clearly. So it might take him a while before he really sees, oh, I actually didn't realize I was running a fantasy with you. And it's so easy to do. And particularly if you're different than who he's dated in the past, or you're the opposite of the previous person he was with, it's so easy to get caught up in kind of running a little bit, rebounding from our past, even when we don't know that we're doing that. So again, my encouragement here is to have a little bit of compassion with yourself and with guys. Some guys, they're playing games and they're fooling around with you. A lot of guys aren't. We just don't know until we know, and that's disappointing. But it's better to be in touch with it than to kind of be on the wrong and receiving end of it. I want to put like a sick little bonus on the end here, which is to say I've been giving you the reasons for which a guy may, be in connection with you and then suddenly disappear. At some level, you don't actually need to know the reason that this happens. The reason, if you're like me, sometimes it may be more comforting to you. Like if I can understand it, it's easier for me to be with the emotional experience. I know that can be true for some of us. But also I want to invite the possibility that you don't really need to know. All you need to know is he's disappeared. He's not my person. I need to grieve and let go. He's disappeared. He's not my person. I need to grieve, let go, move on. And that might be something you can do in short order, might be something that takes you days, weeks, and months to do, but that's really what it is. It's not about, can I get him back? Did I do something wrong? Maybe he's just confused. Maybe he's too stressed at work. It's like we can put all sorts of inserted narratives in, then really just kind of being with the actuality of it, like, he's not my guy, this didn't work out. I might have all sorts of feelings that I'm going to need to feel and let go and process, and that's fine. That is important work. But don't wallow. Don't wallow in the need to know, that I need to know why he did this, or why would he do this to me, or, let it escalate to this type of personal rejection. When someone's not your guy, they're not actually rejecting you really, because they're not your guy, right? And as strange as that may seem, and as difficult as it may be to be with that, the less you can personalize this in some ways and actually not experience it just as rejection, experience it as this wasn't meant to be. Experience it as there's someone for me that is going to want to be with me and is not going to disappear on me. And when you're in the right connection, even if you hit major problems, the right guy doesn't just disappear in those. He says, hey, we've got some problems. We might have to roll our sleeves up. And hey, we might not even know if we can work through our problems. But I'm not just going to suddenly disappear. Like, we have a level of connection. We have a level of rightness. We have a level of mutuality, of mutual obligation, that I'm not just going to disappear. Normally when guys disappear, they're not actually at that level of mutual obligation and connection with you. You may have thought they were, but they're not. So until you have that, you might just want to be open to the fact that, you don't really know where it's going until you've got some more solid foundation to build upon. So this is not just about men disappearing. This is a wider principle that might serve you in life, is to sometimes get out of the analysis and the mentalization and the intellectualization and the need to know and the justification and the whole churning of that, and actually just be more directly with, it didn't work out and I need to heal and move on. And I don't necessarily need to get stuck. Maybe I want to learn a lesson so that there's something that I can take forward. I get that, absolutely. But you don't necessarily need to know the specific thing for him, because I would tell you in a lot of these situations, the guy will make up a reason to either appease you or to give him a best fit that he can see with reality, whether that's actually what's going on. If we had 10 world-class relationship coach psychologists in the room looking at it, maybe we'd have a very different sense of what's going on. Maybe he hit some kind of intimacy level that he's just not comfortable with. Maybe he's just not your guy. And I'm a big fan of when the right person comes along, doesn't mean it's going to be easy, doesn't mean there's not going to be twists in the road, but there's some minimum effective dose of stickability that has you guys staying connected, and that's what I want for you. So let's take a stand for that. Questions and comments below this video, as always. Thank you so much for listening this far. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your attention here. It's been really awesome and life-changing for me to have this and to have this community. So thanks again for your participation here. Subscribe if you haven't. Click the link for the webinar if you haven't. Questions and comments if you will. And as always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.